and I dropped it.
Oh, okay. That's good. I mean, you know, the cause.
It's so strange, but thank goodness. Because I actually don't have a physical bank. Like, I deposit my checks by taking cell phone pictures of them. The only reason I go to a bank is to take cash out of the ATM. 9:30. Okay. Okay, so today is our class on essays. Format of this class is slightly different. I'm actually going to do a lot more talking today than I usually do. So laptops away. But I want to start out with a little bit of context on why we're doing this, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of why the writing section exists as it does. So, as we're putting together your college application essays, there's basically three components upon which your packages as you apply to college are going to exist. And in order of importance, they go, one is academics, two is your test scores, and then three is sort of, we'll call it activities. For many of you, this is extracurricular activities, leadership, but jobs count in this, community service, ways that you sort of contribute. These two are the most important, and you'll notice the thing about these two as well is that they're objective measures. So these have numericals, values associated with them. These don't. And then sort of the fourth, really important one, but quite a bit farther down the list, is your personal statements, so your personal essays. Don't treat this order to mean that these personal essays aren't really important. Any one of these can be screwed up, and tanking your personal essays is a very poor way to find yourself into college. So most important academics, next up test scores, activities, personal essays. We're obviously here, and the reason you take this class is based on test scores. And the reason that people spend time focusing on test scores is that compared to academics, this is an area that you can change in the short term. So as we talked about at the beginning of class, this is something where with the sort of 10 weeks that we're going to spend together in focused study, you can make an actual difference on how you're doing on the test. And I want to show you just a little bit of data on what kind of impact that can make. You'll talk a lot more about this as you go through the next couple of years with your college counselors, with your guidance counselors, with any other support that you have. But any general application questions that people have had on their mind, or as you're beginning to think about this college process, things that are really unclear to you?
Is it better to put a major down even if you're not sure?
Yes. So different folks have different opinions on this. I will tell you what I have heard from guidance counselors and college admissions counselors, which is that no one's expecting you to have a major. Likely your school counselor will tell you that it's not important. It is not very important, but one thing you should know is that colleges are sort of trying to create two things. One is that they're looking to create a class of very talented, as talented as student bodies they can attract. But the other thing they're trying to do is create a balanced class. So, there are a bunch of things that the school needs to do, and one of them is make sure that everyone is taking all of their majors. So my understanding, especially at smaller schools, is that yes, there can be a benefit to declaring a major if it is a major that other people aren't super interested in. So going and saying that you're pre-declaring the most popular major in the school is not likely to help your admissions chances particularly well. So for instance, this would be more like if you were interested in classics. That's not a major that's tremendously popular. And the other one is that I believe you should be able to demonstrate some form of sincere interest in this, so that they know that this is a strategy that people use. And so if you're simply declaring a major, especially an odd or obscure major, for the purpose of admissions only, that's likely to set off some alarm bells. So what I would think about is, if there's a major that is not one of the more popular majors, and that you can credibly show an interest in, then it makes sense to declare it. You also should not be afraid to go ahead and just change this as soon as you get there. So do not let that stop you. Schools are used to you changing majors. Once you're in the door, it's a non-issue. So don't worry that you're bound to whatever major you declare ahead of time. With the exception of some majors will have a different curriculum in the first semester that you'll end up taking. Things like pre-med, they orient you differently. Other thing to think about in applications as well, along the lines of majors, is that do remember every school has a newspaper. Many of them have a band. They have activities, and these activities need to have people participating in them. So if there's a particular activity that you're interested in, and you expect to continue it during school, it can be worth mentioning that, because it is something that schools do need to think about when putting their classes together. Other thing that I'll talk about here is that almost everything that I'm going to say tends to fall apart when you get to the super, super high-end schools. So like Harvard, Yale, MIT, Stanford, Princeton. On College Confidential, the message board is an acronym, HYSMP. For those schools, at the super high-end school levels, kind of all the rules start to break down because they have so many exceptionally qualified candidates to handle everything that it starts to become a bit of a crapshoot. For those schools, the best you can really do is try and be above the threshold. They have enough students above the threshold of excellence to fill their entire class multiple times over. All you can really do there is try and be above all of those thresholds, and then really write the sincerest, most genuine explanation of yourself that you can, and why you want to be there, and what you want to do with your life and your time in college. Other application stuff. Feel free to ask me throughout this. Like I said, this is going to be much more of a talking day than our usual classes, and much more of a context day. So, this is a scatter plot. My favorite kind of graph, and possibly the least intelligible kind of graph to someone who hasn't thought about it ahead of time. So, who has ever seen one of these before? Yeah, okay. So we got about a fair amount of the room. Have you seen this in Naviance? Is that where you've...
Yeah.
Okay. So some schools don't let you look at Naviance until junior year. How have you guys seen Naviance then? Because you count as juniors yet?
No. Like in sophomore year for counselor seminar, we get to like go into our account, just like see certain parts of it.
Oh, like a little preview.
We saw all of ours.
Different school to school.
Since last year.
Yeah, so it's very different school to school. It's one of the things schools are trying to, they're trying to sometimes put a governor on really intense, like the college application craziness. For those who haven't seen it, so what this is a scattergram where on this axis, so all these dots represent students. And on this axis was the GPA of these students when they graduate on a 4.0 scale. And on this axis was their SAT score across all three sections. Each dot here represents a student who applied to, in this case, New York University, NYU. And it's red if they got rejected, and green if they got accepted. So here's a case where you can pretty clearly see, I'm not going to touch the dry erase marker, otherwise I'm going to write on the screen. That you can roughly see the schools running a cutoff here. So pretty much if your GPA adjusted to a 4.0 basis is below 3.0, even maybe a 3.2, you're unlikely to get an admission to New York University. And if your SAT score is below 1710 or so, you're very unlikely to get admission to New York University. Notice that even above those levels, there are still plenty of people who are not admitted. So while it's very hard to get admitted, almost impossible if you're kind of below this range, even if you're above it, there's a fair number of people who are not admitted. That's why it's still challenging. But if you're someone, for instance, who has a 3.5 GPA and your SAT score is in the 16 or low 1700s, you can imagine really working on trying to raise that score is going to substantially improve your chances of admission. Questions? You'll stare a lot at these over the next couple of years. Your parents will stare a lot at these. These graphs will make you completely crazy. So I don't recommend spending too much time on them because especially this one has a lot of dots on it. The one from your school may potentially have very, very few dots on it. And what you'll start trying to do is figure out every single person who was on that graph and every single dot and what everyone's story is and try to explain to yourself, like, what was the deal with that guy? Did they give a lot of money? Or, what was the deal with that person? Why didn't they get in? And you can really go bonkers on these. I would try not to look at them in terms of the individual dots, but just generally in terms of the pattern and what it means for you and your admissions chances. Let me compare this to, so here I'll flip and you'll just see the chart flip. This is Boston University. Let me just flip it back and forth. Whoop. And you can see the pattern a little bit. NYU, Boston. NYU, Boston. So BU, you can actually see even a little more than NYU that there's a pretty clear SAT cutoff. Again, right about here. Like maybe even, if they're doing this, like maybe even here, closer to around 1800. And again, a pretty clear GPA cutoff. Somewhere around about the same marker. The thing you'll notice about both of these schools, these are both very large schools. So NYU and Boston University have very big student bodies. And one of the things you'll note is that the objective measures become very, very important, or are more important at large schools because the admissions committees don't have the chance to look at individual application essays and really take into account a lot of the individual differences in students. So if you're interested in going to especially a big city institution, your objective measures are going to be even more important than as compared to if you're applying to a smaller, more liberal arts institution. Make sense? Questions? Okay. So we're going to talk today about the essay. Sheet here. Where is it? Okay, so first a little bit of history. So your parents, those of yours who were in the States and took the SAT, and very traditionally the SAT was out of 1600 for the first kind of 60 years of its existence. And it just had two sections, the math and the reading section. And math and reading looked pretty much identical to what you see now. The only real big difference in them is they used to have analogies, which is like cup is to bottle as X is to Y used to be a pretty significant part of the SAT. And in the late 90s, they removed those sections from the test. Or they removed analogies from the test, and they renormed the test. And I won't talk about what that means mathematically. So that was the last big revision, was in the late 90s. And that had been the first revision since the 60s. And then in 2004, the University of California system, so UC Berkeley, UC San Diego, all the University of California schools, which is the largest public university system in the country. So we're talking about a lot of students, about a lot of people who apply. They said that they were no longer going to accept the SAT if the SAT did not add some sort of an essay to the SAT scoring. So this was a bit of a business decision, which is note that if you're the SAT, you make your money, or if you're the College Board rather, you make your money by having as many students as possible take the test, and actually having as many students as possible take the test as many times as possible. So something like score choice is introduced as something designed for your benefit, but also makes it a lot easier for each one of you to take the SAT more times, which benefits the College Board. So what they were facing was the largest university system in the country potentially saying that they wouldn't accept the SAT anymore. And this would mean pretty much most students in California apply to one of the UCs. And that means that all the students in California would probably stop taking the SAT, because why would you take the SAT for one school and the ACT for another school if you could just take the ACT and use it all the way around? So the College Board was really concerned. And so they, under pressure from the University of California system, added in the writing section. The writing section that you take as part of the SAT is basically the old writing subject test. So there used to be a writing subject test that was done separately and was actually required by many, many schools, and is now folded into the SAT, and that's why the test is out of 2,400 rather than 1,600. The writing section is not a very good section. It is, so the word for people who study tests and how they work is called psychometricians. It's a person who actually writes tests. And psychometrically, the writing section is kind of crap. The SAT, the only thing that the SAT purports to predict is your GPA of your first year of college. So what they've said is your SAT score should be correlated with your first year college GPA. It's not very well correlated. Like, it's not a very strong predictor, and it works better when combined with high school GPAs. When you add in the writing section, it doesn't increase the predictive power of the SAT at all. So your math and reading sections pretty much do as good a job predicting your GPA as any of the sections do. But it's in there, and it's in there because UC wanted it, and now it's out of the school, things out of 2,400. The good news is that because the writing section isn't very good pedagogically, is actually that it's probably the easiest to study for out of all of the sections. So if you remember, there's a couple of different components of the writing section. Let's have folks pull up their blue books and take a look at it. Okay, and we've looked at test one, so we can sort of use that. Let's flip open to test one. And we'll do the very, very basics first. What are the components of the writing section? So there's a couple of different things in it. The obvious one that we're going to talk about today is the very first, what is the very first section of test one? It's the essay. So the writing section is composed of one essay and then multiple choice questions. I'll go through this fast because we've done this before. There is one 35-minute section. And then there is one 10-minute section at the end. No, sorry. It's a 25-minute section. It's a 35 question section. So there's going to be 3 writing sections, the essay and the 2 multiple choice sections. We've talked about what the multiple choice questions are in writing. There's identifying sentence errors, which is the part of the sentence is underlined, and you have to figure out what the wrong answers are. And there is, nope, sorry, that's actually improving sentences. Identifying sentence error is the one where there's a sentence, and then bits of the sentence are underlined, and there's letters underneath them. There's also improving paragraphs, which we don't talk about much in this class. I will talk about it a little bit at the end. The reason I don't talk about it that much is that mostly I find that the only reason students do poorly on improving paragraphs is if you just don't have enough time when you get to it. So if you're paced well enough to have enough time to get through improving paragraphs, most students do pretty well. So the essay. The essay is 1/3 of the sections on the writing test and about 1/3 of your grade. So the big thing that students tend to do, first of all, about the essay is freak out. So here's my first and most important tip about the essay. And I think the thing that probably helps students the most, which is do not freak out. So let's take a look at how this is actually scored. So if you go to the back to the scoring of test 1, it's actually going to be at the end of it, and I'm going to look over your shoulder here. If you don't mind. Okay. So it's on page 438. So you'll notice the way your essay score is calculated is that it's a combination down the vertical column of the raw score from your writing questions, as well as your essay score along the top. So let's look at a sort of pretty typical score. So let's say you had a raw score of 39 and an essay score of 6. What would your blended score be? It's 39 and 6. Can we up? It's
580.
okay, it'll be a 580. Okay. So let's say you were able to increase your writing score by 2. And so you kept the 39 raw score and you were able to bring yourself up to an 8. What would your new essay score be? What would your new overall score be? Tiffany, what do you got?
610.
610. Okay, so that is a 30-point improvement. Let's take a look at if, how many multiple choice points would you need to do the same rate. So let's say you're at a 6 essay score and a 39. I should have drawn this out differently. Let's do this. 39 and 6 is a 580. And let's say you increase this to 8. 39, 8, 36, 10. Okay. So here's the question: to stay at this 39 and 6 and have an essay score of 580, how much would you need to change your multiple choice raw scores to get to a 610? So at what multiple choice raw score does your score stay at 580? Oh, sorry, go up to a 610.
42.
42. Okay. So this is plus 2 essay points. And this is plus 3 multiple choice to get to the same score. It tends to be a lot easier to get 3 more multiple choice questions correct than it does tend to be to raise your essay score 2 points. The essay is out of 12, so raising your multiple choice score by 2 points is raising it close to 20%, a 20% better essay. Raising your multiple choice score by 3 questions is something like an 8% improvement. Also, this is different note, even you can raise this score by simply like omitting ones you would have gotten wrong. So if you're actually getting a question wrong, you go from getting it wrong to right. You go from getting a quarter point off to a full point on. So this is closer to like 2 and a bit questions, right? So that's why we tend to spend a lot more time in here on the multiple choice than on the essay. Because the work that you do improving your multiple choice has a lot better chance of improving your essay score. I guess the only case where this is not the case, and this is true of very few students, but does happen, is if your multiple choice score is exceptionally high. So if you're getting, all of them right. There's only one person in this room likely to do that, and you're looking at him, because I've done that twice. And so I'm the one who works on my essay score really dramatically. But for most of you, multiple choice is going to be more your focus. The other thing about the writing section and the essay, which makes it nice, even though it's a crap section from a measurement point of view, is that as a result of it being a crap section, like I said, it's pretty easy to learn, and the essay is pretty easy to learn. So let's talk about how the essay, or I'll start with this. The essay that they are looking for is exceptionally formulaic. There is a pattern that they're looking to recognize. And if you can hit that pattern, you can do quite well on the essay quite quickly. And so that's why we're basically only going to spend 1 class on this, is that it's largely about meeting, sort of knowing and being able to display that pattern. The pattern that the SAT looks for